In recent years, I have come to fully understand certain concepts that would have improved my life's quality to a significant extent had I known them 10, 12, or 15 years ago. And in this video, I'm going to share 5 of those key learnings. And I think the last one is really important because that one sums up my overall approach towards life in general. Alright, so the very first lesson that I have learned is that we always think in binaries, because our cognition has a propensity for simplicity, and we find comfort in neatly categorizing the world into binary outcomes. We think things are either good or bad, black or white, things are either wrong or right, that we are either successful or a failure. And this approach, this tendency to color the entire world into black and white, helps us simplify complex situations. It helps us move forward and make quick decisions. So generally speaking, it is of immense help. But the problem with this kind of thinking is that by design, it reduces complex scenarios and puts them in two opposing directions. It takes this complex and multifaceted nature of reality and then oversimplifies it. So we end up labeling outcomes in terms of successes or failures, and completely ignore partial successes and partial failures. Whereas the truth is that those gray areas are where the most valued lessons in life come from. So this whole thing is type of a cognitive bias and is often termed as the black and white fallacy. And you see examples of this kind of thinking in political debates and discussions where people think that there is no room for middle ground or alternate solutions. And I understand why it happens on an electoral or a campaign level. There are several reasons for it, but the main one is that the messaging is usually catered to a large group of audience, and it makes sense to narrow the scope in terms of binary outcomes. But if you take the same approach and have a conversation with a friend or a family member, you soon realize that there is never any sort of winning, that there is never an extension of the olive branch, so to speak. Because anyone who sees this world through this black and white lens always thinks that either this party is right or that party is right, either this ideology is right or that ideology is right. And in that process, they never even acknowledge that both those sides could be partially right or partially wrong. And this either or framework, this black and white dichotomous thinking, when applied to relationships, can also become very toxic very quickly, where you may jump to label the other person as a bad person or as a bad friend or as a bad sibling or as a bad spouse, and ignore everything else that led to that one behavior or that one outcome that you think is bad. But for me personally, this sort of thinking is an antithesis to self-growth, because I used to think that if I attempted to build a new skill or tried a new hobby, and if I failed in that process, then I was a failure. And the problem with that kind of thinking is that I would not acknowledge the fact that in that hard process, I might have actually made some partial success. And if I kept investing my time and energy and attention into that thing, then I may actually get good at it at some point. So in a sense, it's most likely going to be a positive sum game. And it took me years to even accept that this is how the world works. So the way I now look at it is that I set realistic goals instead of aiming for perfection. And then I measure any sort of progress primarily on the input. Am I putting in the effort? Am I frequently and consistently doing it? Could I do more? And then I divert my attention on small wins and small achievements. And I try not assigning extreme labels to the outcomes, because I understand that when you are starting from nothing, let's call it a 0, and aiming for everything or perfection, let's call that 100, you're going to stay closer to 0 for a while before you can even catch a glimpse of that 100. So then all you need to do is to make sure that you're moving ahead and going in a positive direction, and that you're going from a 10 to an 11 and not the other way around. And also consider the fact that achieving a 55 or a 60 or a 70 can also be considered success. And that there are numerous milestones or achievements that exist between 0 and 100. And I will talk more about this approach in the last point, but for now let's talk about the second lesson that took me a while to fully understand, which is this idea that the rewards that you are seeking lies in the feelings that you're trying to avoid. Because we are wired in various ways to avoid hard work, not only because it requires a lot of energy or time or other finite resources, but because of the emotional load it carries. It's the fear of failure and of various other things, like the fear of judgment and shame, that are often beneath these avoidance behaviors. In the world of behavioral economics, this avoidance that we carry within is explained through loss aversion, which came from something called the prospect theory developed by Daniel Kahneman, which is this idea that we are more motivated to avoid losses than to achieve gains, which then leads to irrational decision making. But in the context of hard work, this could mean that the perceived loss are often things like facing criticism or humiliation or other negative emotions. So basically, when things don't go exactly the way we want them to go, we feel a range of emotions. We could feel frustrated, angry, disappointed, helpless, and these are all natural responses to our expectations and our hopes not aligning with reality. So ultimately, the skewed perception of reality leads us to avoid tasks that have a risk of negative outcome, despite the potential benefits. To give you an obvious example, when certain people avoid going to the gym or starting a project that they really feel passionate about, they tend to give excuses that they don't have enough time or resources. But if you were to dig deeper, you may find that their avoidance is often their defense mechanism, that they're trying to avoid the feelings of frustration or failure, that they know that if they went to the gym and did not lose weight immediately or in a certain amount of time, that they will feel frustrated. They may even get angry at themselves, and it may hurt their self-esteem and reinforce this bias that they are a failure. But in all of this, they often overlook the fact that going to the gym, for the most part, has real upsides to it. So whether it immediately results in weight loss or not is almost a secondary outcome. The French philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre, who is synonymous with existentialism, was of this idea that our existence is defined by our choices. So avoiding hard work due to fear of negative feelings is a choice, and making that choice over and over again shapes our identity. So then in situations where we are bound to encounter these feelings, first we need to identify the top feelings that we are trying to avoid, and then prepare ourselves to face those feelings, which is as much or often more important as the completion of that task. And obviously it could feel terrible at times, and in that process we even become too harsh on ourselves. So we definitely need to show some compassion to ourselves. And this is something that I learned pretty late in life, that once we understand what are those feelings, we need to approach them with kindness instead of judgment. And the simplest way to do that is to see yourself in third person, perhaps as your best friend. So for example, let's say if your best friend was going to the gym and he was not losing weight, would you judge him for it? Would you be harsh on him? Or would you be kind and encouraging because you understand that he's doing the right thing and it's only a matter of time before he starts seeing the results? Because detaching yourself from the situation and taking your own advice that you would often give to others has a lot of wisdom in it. And I know it's easier in theory, but it takes a lot of practice to even remind yourself that this is what you're supposed to do, and then a lot more to show yourself the compassion you deserve, because self-compassion is almost like a muscle you develop through practicing it over and over again. Alright, so the third lesson that I learned was that our anxiety, especially in regards to open tasks, doesn't follow a calendar. Now, this is something that should be obvious to us, but a lot of times it isn't, because if it was, we would be able to easily distinguish between the immediate and the distant concerns, things that we need to do in the next 1 hour and things that we have to do tomorrow or a week or a month from now. But by default, our brain doesn't recognize that. It thinks that everything is important all the time. It thinks that the big exam that is coming up in a month from now is as important as the bill that you need to pay today, which is as important as the groceries you should have bought yesterday. And this is something the cognitive behavioral therapy talks about as well. It talks about how we overestimate the immediacy and the significance of future tasks, that it's a cognitive distortion that stems from exaggerated thought patterns. So until a few years ago, I did not even realize how anxious I was feeling about everything that was going on in my life, plus everything else that was going on in the outside world. It felt like I was entangled in a web of anxiety that did not have a fixed point in space or time. It felt endless and overwhelming 24/7. It did not have a source of origin. It did not have a locus of control. It was a perpetual, never-ending blanket of what ifs. What if this? What if that? What if it's this and that? What if it's this and that plus something that's unknown? And I spent many years in this frame of mind because it wasn't just me, it was also the people around me. Every other person burdened with a list of pending tasks and a bunch of responsibilities in this, fast-paced society. And that continued until I started to separate myself from things that were beyond my control but were making me anxious. Anything at a macro level, from news headlines to negative social media trends to something in my own life. And B, when I started to put my own tasks and responsibilities on an actual calendar, because then I could see how big the space was between each of those tasks. Because without these clear distinctions, it felt like my entire existence was on fire and I mostly had a negative chatter going on in my head all the time. Which leads me to the fourth lesson in this video, which is about our thoughts having a dual nature to them, and they impact our emotions by what color we choose to give them. So unless you pay attention to a particular thought, it's both a good thought and a bad thought, just like Schrodinger's cat, which by the way is a metaphor that comes from this thought experiment where a cat is put in a sealed box with a radioactive atom and a poison. So until you look inside it, it's both dead and alive at the same time. And this duality, this crazy cohabitation of the negative and the positive dynamics inside a single thought bubble makes the nature of our own mind a very tricky playfield, where you feel like you have agency over your own thoughts, but that agency is quickly taken away from you as soon as you lose that awareness, as soon as you forget that you can literally choose your own color. And making that choice over and over again is what separates a positive mindset from a negative mindset. And I know it's not a unique concept, we already know this, but that's that. We just know this in theory, but if we have not practiced it, we actually don't even fully understand it. And if we don't fully understand it, we don't know how to implement it, how to make use of it. And there are a lot of tools that are available for us to practice this, and that's what makes it confusing and hard. Should we do mindfulness practice, or do journal 5 days a week, or do we seek therapy, or do we combine all of it? And the truth is that you would not know until you try some of it or all of it. It's just like working out. There are so many types of workouts that are available for everybody, but not all of them would suit everyone's needs. So the trick is in A, trying a few of these, and B, identifying the one that works for you, and C, sticking to it until it becomes a part of your lifestyle. In my case, it's a nice combination of journaling, therapy, meditation, that have been significantly life-changing. But at the same time, I realized that there is no end to these practices, which brings me to the last point or the last lesson in this video, which is all about the illusion of arrival. So if you have ever been in a desert or in extremely hot and dry climate, you would have experienced the illusion of water at a distance, and as soon as you approach it, it either disappears or starts appearing further away. And that's exactly how it feels when you're chasing your own goals and are fixated on them, because the grand happiness that we attach with goal accomplishments has a mirage-like quality to it. And you think that once you get that thing, that shiny object, and could be anything, a new job, a new car, girlfriend, boyfriend, a dog, PS5, that you would be happy, and that happiness will last for long, maybe a lifetime, maybe forever. But that's not how life works. We know this in theory. We are told this by pretty much every old knowledgeable person with a beard and a robe. The positive psychology even has a term for it. It's called the arrival fallacy. But I think understanding of this concept truly only comes with the experience of goal accomplishments, and how much you pay attention to the patterns that are formed followed by those achievements. Because the more experience you have, the more data you have to realize that the spike in happiness that comes from getting something you really want, it comes down either pretty quickly or over a period of time, depending on how much personal significance it has for you. So in essence, you can never feel that you have arrived. In fact, you always feel like you are on a journey going on from one destination to the other, but you never reach. And I realized this after checking off various goals on my list, and they were not in one aspect of my life, but various crucial aspects of my life. And yet I never felt like I have arrived. I just felt like the goalpost had shifted further away. So it's great to have amazing goals and aspire for them, but at the same time, it's super important to detach yourself from them and not only focus on the journey, but also drive pleasure from the journey. And one way to do that is to break that journey into smaller milestones, smaller goals, shorter destinations, whatever you want to call them. So for instance, let's say you're working on decorating your dream house and you know that once it's done, it's going to bring you immense pleasure and happiness, and that's great. But then instead of waiting for the end goal, try not overlooking the joy you would get from small achievements, from finishing up smaller projects within that big project, from the happiness you would get from finding the perfect lamp that just fits in one nice corner, or that painting that you found at a gallery that you love so much, because that's how you drive and sustain the momentum and enjoyment throughout the process. So this approach, this inclination to shift your focus on smaller achievements, helps to spread the joy and makes the entire journey as rewarding as the destination itself. Basically, what I'm saying is that you should not put all your happiness eggs in one single outcome basket.